Hello everyone, this is Dark Journalist. Tonight I have a special interview for you with mystic and intuitive coach Gigi Young. Gigi will reveal the deep occult connection to space, AI, and the eighth sphere. Please join us now. Gigi, it's great to have you back with us.
Thank you for having me.
You've been doing extraordinary work, of course, with your series Occulted, and a series of episodes around esoteric signs and symbols. And what I wanted to open up with, we have so many things to get to today, which we already talked about in the beginning here, pre-record, that there's probably about 6 episodes just in things we need to go over in the short run. But what I want to ask you is, in 2026, looking out there with all the factions pulling from this transhumanist AI side, the political side, the chaos, the war of the religious groups, and the incredible promise, false promise of, this kind of nirvana of technology. Where is this center of esoteric inspiration and information that people can see it in their day-to-day lives and understand there's something else operating in the middle of all this?
Well, I think just seeing all of the technocracy, all of the AI, all of the transhumanism is in a backwards way making people think spiritually, think about the soul. So I think the more we rise towards that, the more people become religious or think religiously or think spiritually, think about the soul. So I think that it's sort of like the more we move towards Antichrist, which is associated with technology and anthroposophy, the more we think about the Christ, the more we think about spirit. So I think it's sort of like the extremes are bringing this forward. And we can see it too in conspiracy culture. Conspiracy culture is becoming huge and massive, and part of that is these discussions about the occult. And so we're sort of compounding all of these things. And moving into 2026, I think to the next election, it's going to become even more and more of a juggernaut, more powerful.
If you were, and I'm sure people, because you're mystic and do psychic work and things, are often looking for predictions and things from you, and we know that that's a very dodgy game about predictions anyway. But what I want to ask you, when you look out from that mystical point of view into 2026, what are the types of overriding themes that you see coming in for this new year?
Well, I think it's going to be very, very political. I think leading up to the 2028 presidency, I think it's going to be incredibly contentious. And I think that that presidency is going to be about human or anti-human. And either completely having someone who is for health and true understanding of what being a human being is and what makes a human being thrive, and protecting and preserving America, and then also figuring out and pointing out all of the individuals that are actually anti-human. And I think that's going to happen from 2026 onward. I think we're moving into a time of spiritual battle, political battle, and it's all going to center around what is human, what it is to be human. And I think there's going to be a lot of people revealed, organizations revealed that are working secretly with transhumanists and tech people that are saying that they're pro-human, but they're not. So I think we're going to really see that kind of clash moving forward, speaking broadly. We can already see it now, but I think it's going to just become even more and more prevalent.
You think an average person, that's fascinating. And I want to add, too, that your predictions over the years, even though it's a pressure point to put somebody in and say, predict what's going to happen, like your predictions have been incredibly spot on with things that happen in the public culture. But if you were to look out and say to the public, an average person might see, well, there are all these billionaires moving into technology, And they might even understand the conversation about, we're going to throw a bunch of people out of work and all these rich people are going to be thriving at the top. Those types of things, which are crucial conversations, seem to be the types of things that people could be reached with. But typically in the public, you're not going to find ordinary understanding about the deeper mystery forces creating the clash, creating the wars, and creating the situations of tension that they can exploit. And that those mystery groups harbor themselves right inside the political system and right inside that corporate elitist system. How do you bring that conversation into 2026 without the fanfare of Conspiracy Inc. and the junk conspiracy and the things that we've seen, with a lot of people grandstanding and all that kind of thing, which has nothing to do, and the pop click podcast world, which has nothing to do with the kind of work that you're doing?
Well, I think that we can have an education on spiritual science and spirituality that is grounded and realistic, that's based in objective fact. And I think that objectively understanding morality and morals is part of that. You're not going to create a healthy, meaningful movement forward in culture unless people act from a place of morality and selflessness. That's absolutely imperative. And then I think that contrasting it, if there is a dark occult order, which I would argue that there is, that is trying to pull levers and control things, they worship death. In one of my culted episodes, I talk about the death cult. And this is what we're really looking at. So everything that they do produces death. Whereas when you're working through higher forces, that produces life in the world. It often takes sacrifice to produce life and evolution, proper evolution in the world. But the death cult is all about control. And so we're seeing that roll out through technology. We're seeing it through this controlled demolition of, the Constitution. And so the death cult wants control. And I think that's a way that you can track it, is on the occult level, it produces death. So it's like, does this produce death or life? That's an easy way to look at it, because ultimately the dark occult is just a giant death cult. War, control, this kind of thing. Even assassination. I know you've talked about that before, how assassination can even be a form of occultism. So that death, war, all of that kind of stuff is part of their occultism, actually.
No question. Yeah. And it goes to the heart of it. There's a kind of a worship of this death cycle.
Yes.
And
they want to produce it. And chaos, because death is also chaos as well. They like that.
Right. And that's so interesting, because the chaos magic is, so obvious. Even as we're starting the show out, that the month has been full of all these crazy things, including, assassinations of leading nuclear scientists and major Hollywood figures and things. So we're right in the heart of it. There's no question about it. I'm curious, though, there's something very interesting that you said in there, and it reminds me about what I'm calling diversionaries. So things that look like, so let's say going into 2026, people in the public do become curious about these secret orders and things and mystery groups that are behind a lot of the events that are going on. So they need to be diverted, because as, people like yourself bring awareness about secret societies and things, those actual groups look at that and say, a little thing going on over here is spreading into a bonfire. We need to throw out these caricatures to kind of make the whole subject, make the whole thing look so over the top that people will say, oh, that has to be junk. It's, the Illuminati control everything. Ha ha. And I'll go back to this. But in the meantime, those figures that they're promoting out there that are doing this, and I could name several, I could sit here probably for the whole show and name so many. They come out and they're consciously using that, manipulating the public for, the type of audience manipulation and marketing and intel forces that are behind them. How do you tell? what's a good way, a good kind of dowser tool for finding the really core, potent information regarding those types of very heavily occulted forces?
Yeah, so I think that you want to avoid sensationalism. So when there's like a thumbnail or it's like clickbait and it's like click here, X, Y, and Z, real spiritual information may be sensational. It may be incredible, it may be inspiring, it may be shocking, but when you have people that are trying to market you something spiritual and commodify spirituality, or commodify topics that breach into spirituality, like the UFO file, when they create it as a marketing product, a commodity, it becomes entertainment and it becomes imbalanced. So, real spiritual information, real conversations should be very grounded. They should have a practical and reasonable cosmology that you can be introduced to and follow and sense and know. The presentation should be moral, meaning you shouldn't be sold like 50 million things in one conversation. And so I think we really have to look for the commodification of very important topics, because what's happening is that there's an incredible problem with plagiarism, where you have someone, like yourself, who researches something for like your whole life, or 50, 60 hours, and then a larger channel or someone else comes and takes that information. It takes them a day to take what took you 50 hours.
Right.
And they put that out there. And because they didn't do the research, or they didn't do that psychic work, they're not actually qualified to talk about it. How could they? They didn't do the work. They're not involved in the process. You can't answer any questions or get deep on something that you didn't actually do the work on. So it's very surface level, it's very shallow, and they're really counting on people to click on things to be entertained and to not go very deep. And so the plagiarism thing is becoming a very big deal. And you get people who are not often on a spiritual level at the level of initiation that it should be to even have that information, right? What do we do with
Oh,
that?
yeah.
What
Yes.
do you do there? And so there's certain things that you should look for, to make sure that you're not wasting your time on someone who, or just content that's not actually going to enrich your understanding of the world and of the spiritual plane and of very important topics that you're going to need to be informed about moving forward.
Oh, incredible. Yeah, there's no question about it. I think it's actually crucial, with the amount of money, pouring into the formerly independent media space, which is now just another zone of the corporate media dressed up and astroturfed as this other thing. But it is a core thing, because if you're getting just the trappings of the topic, and so it's all sizzle and no steak as it goes, you're just getting this kind of, oh, there's the headline of it, I'm following the issue, or I'm following that topic, and you're not. Actually, you're being led over a cliff by a monetary plan or an intel plan. It's interesting to me because I've seen your work, of course, imitated and plagiarized in this way as well. But it interests me because I say to myself, what is it in this work that needs to be diverted? That's the question I often ask. I mean, there's always the opportunist who just wants to glom on to the next thing that's happening and steal someone else's research. But then there's something else, which is, we talked about Atlantis and how Atlantis really came into frame in the past few years in a particular way that it could be used as a buffer, because there were conversations and things that had come into the public which started to break down the false over technology version of the UFO file conversation and aliens, And so they needed to seep into the Atlantis conversation, which they have done, and they continue to do. And they might do it using your work or my work. You have warned, actually have an episode that we did 3 years ago where you warned that there's going to be a false story about Atlantis, the same way they were laying out a false CIA UFO file version of things. So when you get down to it, it's almost like everything that's taking place, there is this doppelganger with it. So tell me, when you're doing your own work and you start to see these things pop up, how do you navigate that space? How does the public, you've already said, well, pay attention to things that aren't sensationalistic, or, have a kind of a moral compass when you're looking at these things. Don't dine on junk food or you're going to get obese, right?
Yeah. Well,
And so we got a lot of obese.
Yes. Well, I do think that there are certain occult orders that are in control of the government and the world. And I do think they have a very specific ideology. And I think they have a certain religion they'd like to bring forward into the world that involves aliens. Aliens and sort of changing our idea of our human history. And I think the Atlantis accounts, and I think the reality that Atlantis exists, I think kind of directly confronts the way in which they want to rewrite our history. So for the last couple decades, the most trendy and popular thing is ancient aliens sort of stuff, where human beings are created in a petri dish, and every single megalith that you see is built by an alien, and it infantilizes humanity. And it makes humanity the product of some kind of eugenics project from aliens from another planet. That is bizarre on the mystery science side. It makes no sense. And so it's really creating this strange origin story that will lead humanity into a false cosmology that removes them from what is called initiation science, which is their ability to transform themselves into an eternal form. It's your immortality, basically. So it is something that brings you externally and inverts you, rather than actually allowing you to understand your real history, humanity's real history. And so Atlantis, when we understand Atlantis, we see that all of these megaliths, are built by humanity during the Atlantean era. And people can believe in aliens or not. That's not the question here. That's not the thing here. It's that humanity had this technology during the Atlantean period. And that really messes up, I think, the dark occult aspect of the deep state, because they're really depending on the alien god ideology.
Right, they need it.
They need it. They cannot have you think that you are made in the image of God, that you are the microcosm of the macrocosm, and that the earth solidified over time into matter through a very specific process that we can understand in mystery science. Very, very precise. It's not unusual. We can go back and understand it. And that human beings and the earth have evolved together and solidified. And there was no point of being created in a petri dish at all. It's a complete and total lie. But then you look at this obsession with these things and mRNA and all that kind of stuff, and you see, okay, this is a religion to these people. The idea of genetic modification and the Gattaca Society. This isn't just scientific interest. This is a religion. This is their occult ideology. They think that they're going to become the gods by now going off planet and colonizing worlds and genetically modifying and practicing eugenics. This is their religion. And they have to change our past so that it supports the future they want to create, which is space colonization, genetic manipulation, and a bunch of other stuff that is very similar to, the Third Reich, and sort of these bizarre materialist interpretations of spiritual things that make them gods rather than worshiping God, essentially. So all of the Atlantis stuff is the gateway into understanding our real history, the earlier epochs of the earth, so enriching, so empowering, and they want to say, that's not yours. You never did that. Aliens built that megalith. this is alien technology that allows them to completely control our history and completely control a technological revolution that they want to bring about in the future, and have a story about how they have this advanced technology. So
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And at times it's so naked and brazen the way that it's done that you're like, oh, this came directly out of a script where they're reinventing the past and putting this imprint on top of it. Now, the thing that they did for the longest time was be the grand poobah science and, evolutionary track and all this kind of stuff. That was one kind of a take that they had. We'll completely get rid of all these stories from the past, and we'll get rid of people talking about the UFO file. We'll get rid of people talking about various things that happen in public, conspiracies and otherwise, and keep those on kind of a weird, humiliated level on the public. Astrology, other things of this nature, psychic work. And then it breaks and it breaks and it breaks over time. And these people decide, well, we're going to switch this over. Now we're going to co-opt all these people who've pushed us to the brink where the stuff is getting out. And now we are the ones who are going to come out and give them the false story. We're going to divert them from where they need to go. It's this diversion that seems like we're in the heart of this right now, which is why things are so chaotic when you get to a public level. There's no good explanation from the leading intellectual figures of our day about why the leadership does the things that they're doing. That's because it goes to an occult purpose. But Gigi, what is the occult purpose?
Well, even the podcast scene, it's like there's one opinion allowed on the podcast scene.
Yes.
Which is that Nephilim are aliens, and this whole alien stuff, it's going beyond general interest. It's the only opinion that's allowed on big podcasts. If no other opinions are even allowed, really, it seems that way. Or you may have some religious people chiming in. But it does seem to be a huge push to control. And then we have Avi Loeb obviously trying again with his, three-eye atlas. Now he's saying it's a pulsating, like he's basically doing the rendezvous with Rama thing. And so you have that thing going on, and it's just, they're hoping that people will take it to the next level, but people I don't think they're as interested as they would like, or I think it may be a little more chaotic than they thought it would be.
Oh, that is fascinating. Because, well, in the case of Loeb in particular, tinkering around over here at the astrophysics lab, he's been trying to introduce this theme for a while. Oumuamua is AI. He's obviously been put on a very particular track, which is kind of the thinking man's version of alien contact. And, his background in Talpiot and other things give us that, and Star Wars, SDI. He's been in these programs for 4 decades. And part of the problem with the people who give us these answers is they are all wedded to that operation and the systems, for their financial future, for their well-being of their family, and on a much deeper level, their lives or whatever it happens to be. So it's very interesting because it's sometimes talked about as almost like a post-truth position that we're in. One of the problems with that is there is a way to shake out of it, I believe, but I want to ask you this. It is the false truth bringer archetype paradigm that it seems like we're in. It seems like you're describing. Is that anywhere near the truth?
Yeah, and I do think that we're probably going to have to see the false thing first, and then we'll be able to address it.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
I think that it just, the issue is that all of these institutions sort of support, I mean, it's very high profile, the people who believe in this kind of stuff. And so I think that they're going to have to do a PSYOP or an operation at some point. We were talking about Spielberg's film earlier coming out.
No question.
And there's all
Disclosure Day.
Disclosure Day.
This
And
thing and
then,
the imagery, I just want to mention this, that you tapped into the imagery looking at that and just saying that there's an esoteric signature immediately with it.
yeah, with the bird and the spirits of the air. And yeah, it is going to be a very, I think, esoteric film. I think it's going to contain a lot of their personal occult symbology
Right.
within their organization. And I think that we're probably going to have to just experience the false disclosure and all of that, and then probably just confront it as it comes because they have too much power, too much influence, too much control. And I don't think that this is entertainment for them. For them, this is their spiritual belief. They feel very spiritual about outer space. They feel very religious about technology. I think we've seen that. A lot of the tech bros have incredibly occult imagery and messaging around what they're bringing forward. So technology is extremely religious. Space travel, space colonization. I mean, Werner von Braun and Elon Musk have both said they're going to bring the light of consciousness. They use the same wording to
Right.
other planets. So this is a religious thing. It's a spiritual thing that's being talked about as science and progress and natural evolution of the culture, but it's really a religious thing for a lot of the dark occultists. Technology is religious. Aliens are creators. They are what it's what they want to become. They want to become the people who colonize planets, even though, you can't actually for different spiritual reasons that are not considered. It's the height of materialist delusion, actually, to think that. And I know that that will upset some people, but I would encourage them to understand the spiritual realities of the planet and the human being and the planet's energy bodies and the human being's energy bodies. And when you take that into account, you get a much different view of outer space and planets than what you do from the materialist view. And so that's what we need to understand. Yeah.
Well, that is fascinating. And it's interesting because I want you to go into what the reasons for that and how Earth is crucial for the evolution of humanity and this idea of just, springing off to another civilization and Earth imploding or something. It's not practical by any sense stretch of the imagination, although it's just the kind of elite fantasy that they would sell to the public.
Yes, and to be clear, it's not that I would be personally against academic exploration of space or anything like that or whatever. It's just right now there are spiritual inversions about space and planets, and we're entering into the idea of outer space and planets from an inverted perspective, which will lead to disaster. So it's not about never exploring space or something. That's absolutely not what it's about. It's about entering into these things from the right foundation so we can actually enjoy it, so we can actually do it properly. So it's about the right entering into it, if you will. It's just like technology, right? It's not that you can't have advanced technology. We can, but it's about having it stewarded properly, understanding the spiritual implications, understanding what we're really getting into rather than being pushed into things, rushed into things without full knowledge of what we're interacting with. That's the problem, not the technology, not outer space. The problem is that we have to enter into it properly in order to not hurt ourselves very, very badly, like in Atlantis, actually.
Yes. Yeah, complete destruction.
Yes.
That's an excellent point because then what you're actually creating is this misshapen Frankenstein, and that's not evolution, which is exactly what they're selling it. The augmented human is evolutionary, and his companion, the pet robot, going with him. This is interesting too because I've been around the crowd that has been in that developmental cycle of robotics and things like that, and know people associated with it who tell me that the human robot thing, that it was actually in the Gulf War that we were testing those things out. That's 30 some odd years ago. So, they've had the humanoid robot for a long time. The rollout of like, hey, he's going to help you and, he'll walk beside you and keep you off drugs and things like that. It was one of the weirdest things that I see floated around there on the tech side. And they have positioned Elon in a number of these. And we all know that, the whole thing that they've placed him with Mars, they're associating every progress that they're attaching with him, like electric cars and SpaceX. They're attaching all of that directly to his Mars obsession, which I find interesting. But if we were to look at it like this, in the esoteric literature, in the mystery school work, there's a definite comprehension of what the moon and the planets and the spheres are in relation to the human being. And this is a crucial relationship that we have with the cosmos that impacts our spirituality directly. Gigi, tell me some of that so we get the real contrast from what it actually is all about versus what they're telling us it's all about.
Yes. So you'll hear a lot of very unusual things about the moon because I think the moon has some unusual characteristics. I think Mars may have some unusual characteristics, and the moons in the solar system may as well. But from the esoteric point of view, the moon is a part of the Earth, and it actually emerges from the Earth at a certain point in our development. So the Earth and the moon were once fused, but of course we have to keep in mind that the Earth and the moon were not yet solid. They're in kind of a quasi-spiritual state. And so as the Earth solidifies, we get the separation of the moon and the Earth. And the moon and the Earth work in tandem together as kind of light and shadow. So on the spiritual side, all of our unhealed karma and the solar system's unhealed karma, including the angels, right? This is where we get into fallen angels, the eighth sphere. All of that is held within the realm of the moon, in which our physical moon is a barrier or marker or protector of. So our moon isn't evil, it's not negative, like people say. The moon is protecting the Earth, in fact, from beings that are outside normal evolution, the normal evolutionary life wave of the sphere. So we need the moon. But you can understand that if the moon is a protection, basically, then people might want to tamper with the moon in order to release the things that are behind it, things from the moon realm, right?
Right.
So when we understand the esoteric reality of the moon, then we can understand, why does the moon have such unusual characteristics? People say it rings like a bell. People say that it has mechanical parts, allegedly. I didn't go there and see, but if it did, we'd have to factor in, okay, well, what is going on spiritually that would play into this? Mm-hmm. Okay, and so the moons also work with the planets in that they have a relationship together, and they are in communication spiritually. So there's a lot to do with the moon, I think, that is not quite understood because it's not viewed from the spiritual perspective. It's just viewed from this materialist perspective. And then to make up for it, again, we're getting this fallacy, which is the alien fallacy, which is anything that I don't understand from the past must be an alien.
Right.
And again, this is not to convince anyone that there are or are not aliens. That's your journey. But, we can't just rightly say that everything that is unusual from our past was put there by an alien.
Right.
We can't do that. That's not logical. We have to understand, again, about Atlantis, that we were spacefaring during Atlantis. I mean, look at the pyramids, look at the megaliths. Clearly that kind of ingenuity would go towards engineering.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like if you're going to build a sphinx, if you're going to build the pyramid, of course you're going to build propulsion. You're going to build these different things too. They were more advanced than we are. Actually, the Atlanteans were more advanced than we are now.
Oh, so absolutely.
It becomes stunted to look at our the megaliths, or the potential of there being structures on Mars, the potential of there being structures on Moon, on Phobos or Deimos or wherever they are, to think, oh, well, that has to be aliens. Okay, well, let's actually go back and understand our past so we're not, entering into this from basically a big lie where, the government or these dark occult societies in the government just tell us our history because they discovered some structures or something. That's the real risk. But with the moon in particular, the real key there is to understand the moon actually is our protection. So why are people wanting to mess with the moon then, if it's our protection?
Oh,
Why are they wanting
interesting.
to release something?
Yeah.
Why are they wanting to put a nuclear plant on the moon? If that thins the veil, what is the occult reason why they're doing all of these things?
Oh, that's interesting. Stripping away defenses.
Stripping away your defenses. That's what the moon is, a protector. And that's how Athena's, portrayed with her bow and arrow, right?
Right.
The moon
Right.
goddess is, she's a protector. And so, yeah, it is, I see it very differently than I think the mainstream, sort of alien scene sees it. And I think we have to approach it with much more spiritual acumen to really address the kind of disastrous things that could happen if we're not careful with how we approach these very big issues that seem kind of kooky, seem kind of weird. Yeah, it's weird until you actually start getting pictures of pyramids on one of these places. Then it's real serious, because then we're in a real deep conversation real fast. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So.
Oh, we need the real conversation. It's absolutely true. I think there have been, as much as there's been like this dark occult seeping into the culture to control it, the buffer, the contrast against it has been these other mystery school groups leaking information into the culture, which accelerated dramatically, as we've talked about before, around the 19th century, specifically 1879, which I think is an interesting year to calculate this all from. But one of the things that was introduced in all of that, Gigi, is reincarnation in a major way, and to a point where in the 20th century it picked up dramatically. In the 1960s and 70s, it became, there were the plays and movies and books and the whole thing, and all the Edgar Cayce work came out finally, after Cayce had been doing all this work for decades before anyone really discovered him. I mean, he was a marginal figure during his lifetime, except at the end. So when we look at that, what is it? And I think that we've kind of dropped the ball with reincarnation in general as a culture. This part being given back to us through the esoteric interpretations, but still a Christian, Western, Christian occult, esoteric tradition. What is it about reincarnation that was so blocked off, and how is it important to reintegrate that?
Yeah. So Rudolf Steiner said that one of his missions was to reintroduce reincarnation from this Western perspective. So reincarnation was removed from Christianity because we get the incarnation of Christ in Jesus, and the whole entire, way in which humanity operates changed. And we needed to go inward and become kind of singular. It's like we became hermetically sealed when we get the incarnation of Christ. Our entire life changed on a spiritual level. How we operate changed. And so we needed to have a spiritual system, which is Christianity, modern day Christianity, that really allowed people to focus on the individual, on themselves. And this was in stark contrast to the Eastern systems, which had ruled, and the pagan systems, which were all about plurality, right? It was actually about disassociation. The earlier systems were about, doing plant medicines and getting out of your body. It was about escaping the body into
Right.
the spiritual world and having these spiritual experiences and coming back in.
Hmm.
And you see at the heart of the East, you also see this idea developing that, like, the entire physical world is Maya, it's illusion. And so
Right.
how we were evolving up until the incarnation was of Christ was some people, a lot of people, not all, but many people were starting to see the physical world as though it's not real. It's
Hmm.
more important to disassociate and go into the spiritual realms and have these ecstatic experiences, oftentimes with different kinds of medicines or breath work or whatever it is. But that wasn't going to work after the incarnation of Christ, or what Rudolf Steiner calls the turning point in time. So now we have a different way in which our very consciousness operates, which needed to be very individualistic. And so what happened is the church fathers begin to remove these pluralistic ideas. We get rid of the gods, which are the spiritual hierarchies as well. We no longer view many different gods. Well, because we're on a completely different track now. We have to see everything within us, not outside of us. Everything has to be visible through us, through Christ. That's how we evolve forward. So we remove reincarnation, even though every system has acknowledged that before. I think there's some level of arrogance to say that every system before Christianity has no value, has zero value. I think that we have to look at the past systems as saying, that kind of spirituality was right for that time. That was where we were. That was where our consciousness was. That was where it's needed. But we evolve over time, especially in 2,000-year cycles. Our consciousness changes, it evolves. We don't have the same consciousness as we did even 500 years ago, actually. We don't think the same. We don't perceive the same way. We don't operate the same. So that has to be allotted for. Right, and Rudolf Steiner mentions this. He says we have to factor reincarnation back in, and also the spiritual hierarchies. We have to understand the angelic hierarchies. We have to understand the realms of the cosmos, which are the planetary realms, but they're actually just different planes. So all of these things we have to bring back in because they're objectively true. And we have to view it in a scientific way. Everything in the spiritual world should be perceived objectively as spiritual science, just like we understand every phylum of bumblebee in natural science. We should understand every kind of angel, their activities. We should understand spiritual evolution, or how we develop our immortal body, or initiation science. All of these things have to now be understood objectively like a science, because they objectively exist. And the first 2,000 years of Christianity is to prepare us for this more scientific level of spiritual perception and understanding. So we do have to understand reincarnation. And by the way, it does not threaten Jesus. It does not threaten our understanding of Jesus. It does not threaten our understanding of anything in the Bible or anything the church fathers have ever said. It only enriches it. And that is what we can come to see. It only deepens our understanding of the Christ.
That is so fascinating. And it's interesting because the lives, the previous lives of Jesus are outlined by a lot of that mystery work, including, Cayce going back and saying Emilius is the same character as Christ. And this is important because Emilius sets the tone in Atlantis as the contrast to the Belial group. And the Belial group is very much, it seems, in this period of time that we're in, it's the Belial group heading up the technology as they did previously in Atlantis. It's so fascinating to me when you're going over this, because I'm thinking, well, now, we have the space commander, Chance Saltzman, who's a very unusual, he's the commander of Space Force. But he has this very unusual background from Malmstrom Air Force Base. And like so many of these people in these positions, there's some big UFO file connection with who they are. But one of the things that he put out was, and this just happened in the last couple of days, he put out this full presentation, which I wasn't able to get to you till just before this interview. So we'll do something big on it later. But it's very clear in there that the dominance in space, the warlike dominance in space, is core to that imagery. And I'll flash some of the images up there on the screen now for viewers. But when we look at it and we see some of these, it says orbital warfare, and it shows this Norse character, and it's called Norse Pantheon. And it's this female character with wings. And here they are calling in that Norse mythology. But what was interesting to me of the seven, and of course, these are like, tarot cards practically, or you call them Dungeons and Dragons cards, which is really what they look like if you think about it. They look like game cards. It's a very strange thing they're doing with this. But one of the things is that the last card is Ghost. And you've told me before about your own kind of psychic impressions in space. And there's a lot of ghosts in that space. And I'm not talking about human ones.
Yes. So one of the things that comes from a spiritual understanding of space is that if we leave the planet, okay, we basically don't have protection spiritually from the entities that exist within that realm. So in occult science, the orbits of the planetary spheres from the Ptolemaic model, so the geocentric model, the orbits of the planetary spheres are different realms. And these realms are populated by different kinds of entities. And so when you get to the realm that's kind of around the Earth, this is more like the eighth sphere
Right.
of Rudolf Steiner. And so when you start to leave the Earth, we're leaving the body and the aura and the magnetic field of the Earth, and you become susceptible to the entities that populate that part of the orbit of the atmosphere. And there are real entities that find their power and their existence there. And so when you leave the planet, you don't have the same kind of consciousness that you have on the planet. And this is something that we have to understand, that we have to think about. And you can very easily become possessed, especially when you leave the planet, because you just don't have that protection of the Earth's magnetic field, bioenergetic field.
Interesting. This puts a totally different spin on NASA and everything else, because of course, viewed from a purely materialistic thing, all you have to do is worry about, your physical environment. Can you breathe? And when they talk about this, they're like, of course, SpaceX and all the rest, they're like, oh, we're going to set up all these living quarters in Mars and happy days are here again. But the truth is, it's an incredibly difficult endeavor, on one hand, to have a regular society, civilization going on in this fashion. The other deception involved here, Gigi, and this is an interesting thing because, there's so many questions around it, but the idea that they've already gone deeper, much deeper into space than they've admitted, and they've already sent people in. So they already have these results. So I try to explain this sometimes, and I guess what the answer that I want from you in looking at this is, how do you see this aspect of the information they've been able to glean through secret and covert space activity and the infrastructure they've set up? And I can track back certain types of Mars efforts to the 1950s. Von Braun, who you mentioned earlier, he told Gordon Cooper, get fit, get ready, we're going to Mars. This is in 1965. So what happened, Gigi, to those missions, and why were they kept so secret? Why do we know nothing about them? And do they exist?
Yeah, well, I think that it is very unusual why we suddenly go to the moon and then we never do it again, and we've lost the technology, and then we do see a kind of Nazi space religion as well.
Oh,
They
yeah.
do have religious feelings about outer space, and their entire origin story is about colonization and these space gods that they're genetically related to. So we have to keep in mind also that this is again a religious thing for these people. It's a spiritual thing for them, and so they don't feel like they need to involve the public, probably because they feel like they are uniquely related to the Nordic aliens or whatever it is. We are the dirty masses, and they're going to do whatever they need to do in order to get off world and become the eugenics people that seed all these worlds. And this is, of course, a complete delusion. And one thing that could be going on is that when you start to make demonic contact, so you start to reach out in the spiritual world and you're not initiated enough to do so, you begin to attract all kinds of demonic entities to you that will give you knowledge for personal power. So they'll give you technological secrets, they'll give you wisdom. Demonic entities are very intelligent. They're not good, but they're very intelligent.
Uh-huh.
And it wouldn't surprise me at all if you have demonic connection and possession for long enough, that if we consider that space is haunted, or that when we leave space we don't have any protection, it would make sense to me that the occult side of this could be that maybe these people are communicating with demonic entities that want them to build these technologies so they can get off space, off planet, and into these different spheres like Mars, and then probably start messing around with the core of Mars, the bioenergetic field of Mars, of the planet, just like we did in Atlantis. It's a repeat of what we did during that era. My guides have actually called it planetary necromancy. Where you actually understand that the planets are barriers to other worlds. The planet isn't so much another world, right? It's that the planet itself is like a door into the higher, into the spiritual planes. And so they kind of are like gates. We know this from ceremonial magic. I mean, back in the day, they used to just use a sigil of Mars.
Right.
Samael,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Samael or Mars. They would work with the angel of Mars, right? Or the angel of Jupiter. They would use symbols. They would use iron. Well, now they can go to the planet.
Mm-hmm.
So they're actualizing something very important that we need to understand. And I think that what they want to do, especially with putting nuclear reactors there, that's very important, because these are occult items. A nuclear reactor is an occult item. That technology is thinning the veil. It's not just like for power or something. And so I think they want to like invert the poles on the moons or the planetary spheres to release what is behind them. And I think ultimately this is what Rudolf Steiner was talking about when he was talking about the eighth sphere and technology. I think that we can develop technologies to be ceremonial and almost bring about the eighth sphere by creating these inversions, the inversions of the poles on different planets, by having, the massive electrification of our planet, of other planets, really creates a synthetic energy field in which demonic entities can, quite frankly, enter into. So it's all about creating this false aura around the Earth, this false, electrical body of electricity and radiation, and all this kinds of discordant frequencies that are synthetic and unnatural. And that actually helps to bring about the eighth sphere. This is what the Kardashev scale is actually all about.
Yes.
These technologies that surround the sun, that cage the sun, it's this whole thing. It's actually very satanic if you understand what
Oh,
it
yes.
is. Yeah. So I think that there's a whole piece to that is actually about creating the eighth sphere with technology. By
Right.
discordant frequencies and inverting the poles of planets, which let dark entities out, which would not naturally be allowed out.
That is terrifying. Yeah, and it's very interesting because when this thing about the weird Space Force tarot cards came up, I was reminded of two things. One was that CERN tarot deck, which had a lot of this imagery relating to space and dimensions with CERN. It was incredibly well informed. We did several shows on, but I still feel like whenever we touch on that, all kinds of things open up. And when we did that episode on CERN in the summer, this is what this was reminding me of. But then there was the Montaigne tarot, the original Italian Middle Ages tarot, and that being holding up the eighth sphere in that period. And later, Steiner saying, well, through some misappropriation, Theosophy let out the information of the eighth sphere, which was the highest secret in the mystery schools, wasn't supposed to come out that way. And it was let out in a false fashion regarding the moon and attributing the moon as the eighth sphere. But it's very interesting because in the work that you've done around the eighth sphere, and from the way that I would interpret it is we're looking at something which is the sum of imagination and thought put in kind of a dark shadow vein, and then the existence inside of it, a kind of virtual reality of projection that feels like, a real life, a real experience, but it is a false experience. And that's where the whole piece in anthroposophy comes from, with Ahriman and the eighth sphere. That's the kind of thing that we're seeing with the technology. The technology is an entree, in a sense, to this type of reality. I mean, is that how you see it?
Yeah, I think that there's actually kind of a false reverse resurrection that's going on with the incarnation of Ahriman involving what we were just talking about. This inverting of the poles is actually bringing to life something. It's bringing something here, which for them is like a kind of a reverse resurrection, or it's like a resurrection for them. This entity they want to bring forward. They have to do that. And so it's like a massive field of electricity, but it's also energy. It's also an entity that's going to enter into that field they generate, that field they create. So
Right.
the eighth sphere is also a being, is what I'm trying to say. It's also
Interesting.
it's an entity. Yeah, in spiritual science, every planetary body is a being. It's not like an inanimate object. We see it as an object because the being is so massive. But every planetary sphere has a regent, and it really is a being. Well, what's the eighth sphere's regent? We know Zadkiel, we know Michael is the regent of the sun, we know these different things. Well, what's the regent of the eighth sphere? What entity is that?
Right.
And I think this is one of the deepest mysteries that Rudolf Steiner was associating with Gemini, the false father. And so,
Yeah.
so there is an entity that is coming about, but he has to come about in a very specific way. He has to come out in a completely synthetic way, a completely artificial way, because he's Antichrist. Christ is life. Christ is natural. It's everything that's natural. We have to harmonize with nature, with Christ, and we become eternal through understanding it and working with it. This is as everything unnatural. For something to be unnatural, it has to be man-made. That's the definition of artificial. So there's a part of the eighth sphere that we have to create. For it to be truly artificial, we have to create it. And that's what is about. That's what Mars is about. That's what the moons are about. That's what the technology is about. That's what all the Nazi stuff is about. That's what I would say it's about.
Fascinating.
But it's also bringing forward a being, an entity that we would call Antichrist.
Well, that's fascinating because the personification of the sphere is something I don't think people have attempted to characterize before. And it's an excellent question, of course. It's interesting to me, too, when I look out at this and, I'm thinking about so much of Steiner looking ahead into the century that we're in and seeing the technology come in and saying, you're going to have to face off against this. I want to read a passage that involves him looking and seeing these kind of spider beings coming in to the evolution of humanity through our overuse of this kind of technology, locking them in so that they become companions, basically, of humanity. And I just want your reaction to this very brief thing, which I know you're familiar with, but we'll get a kind of a live feel on this. I love that Montagna Roya.
There it is.
Very interesting. Wow. We could crack that. So here's how we'll do this. I'll just read this particular part. There's a great setup for it, but we'll leave that for later. Okay, Gigi, this is the quote that gets me when speaking about this period in time, and here we go. Now, the thoughts of human beings that have no reality all of a sudden will become realities when the moon and the earth will unite again. From the earth there will spring forth a horrible brood of beings. In character they will be in between the mineral and plant kingdom. They will be beings resembling automatons with an overabundant intellect of great intensity. Along with this development, which will spread all over the earth, the latter, the earth, will be covered as if by a network or web of ghastly spiders possessing tremendous wisdom, yet their organization will not even reach up to the level of the plants. They will be horrible spiders who will be entangled with one another in their outward movements. They will imitate everything human beings have thought up with their shadowy intellect, which did not allow itself to be stimulated by what is to come through new imagination and through spiritual science in general. Is that what we're looking at with the cradle of AI? How do you see what he's talking about? What are the ghastly spider beings? And he goes along in there to tell us that they become then sort of co-companions with humanity in this dark scenario.
They already are. This is just my, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to speak for Rudolf Steiner. I can just say what I've seen, which is that I've seen these spiders around, different sizes of them actually. And it always reminded me of, I don't know if you've seen sometimes the people that have schizophrenia.
Yes.
And they see the bugs, the insects.
Oh, yeah.
That are always like on them and biting them. I've always wondered if their clairvoyance is opening up too soon. They're afraid, and the bugs are actually these spiders.
Interesting.
Because they're like an insect, and how I see them is they're already here. They just become, when the moon returns to the earth, they just become visible. What was hidden becomes visible. Basically, a lot of things that are going on the spiritual plane we're kind of protected from right now that are going on, but they're not deeply visible. But when the moon returns to the earth, we begin to see all these things which are happening in the spiritual plane but become obvious to us. We become more clairvoyant. How I see these spider things is they actually eat stuff that is emitted from the human being when the human being is unconscious and in fear. So they sort of, how I see them is there's a purpose for them because they actually consume this, you could say, sludge that comes out of people when they're in the wrong energy. So they actually eat that, and then that is sort of goes into making the eighth sphere, or that goes into making, it's digested into this darker realm. That's how I see it. Just like there are sort of elemental beings that are life elementals that transform your healing into your eternal body, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I see that, and I think that technology is deeply connected because when we're looking at technology, we're dealing with automation. So we're dealing with soullessness. Like all technology is a conversation about to be soulless, to be unaware, to be unconscious. Because when you're automatic, like Gurdjieff says, when you're unconscious, you're a robot, you're an automaton.
Yes.
So
Oh, yeah.
all of this initiation we're going through with technology is really an exercise in soullessness and who is soulless and who is not. Really, I mean, that's a harsh word. I would maybe say, using the anthroposophical system, maybe who has reached the stage of consciousness soul and who has not reached that stage. So it's not like you actually have no soul. It's that the soul has not yet has not yet awakened, I would say.
Right. Right. It's in darkness.
It's in darkness. It's not. You're
Yeah.
not really soulless. It's that it's not awakened. It's there, but it's not. It's not kindled. So, yeah, that's
Right. So it's latent. It doesn't fulfill its promise.
yes, yeah. 'Cause some people get a little crazy about people not being people anymore because they're not
Right.
awakened, and they're a person. It's just that they're not awakened.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We see the great insults. The ultimate thing is they're not human and I am. All right.
Yeah, that's where it kind of goes. And I was kind of bringing it there, and I want to bring it back to like, no, they could awaken. Like, we're all under pressure. They could absolutely awaken. You did, I did. So we can, I mean, I think we have. So, but like, yeah, so it's possible. It's
Yeah.
possible. Yeah.
Well, you make a great point here. No, and I think that there are people who act in such a fashion that their humanity is so dwindled down that they're barely recognizable as human. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. There's no question about it. We've seen it, and they become a kind of a black hole.
Oh yeah, they're like a robot. They're automatons. They are basically what technology is, if you think about it.
What's fascinating to me after reading Steiner's work for so many years is when he uses a term like ghastly. Steiner doesn't use terms like that. He's really seeing and describing something there. And when we get to your vision of it, there also seems to be this kind of invasive quality to the way he's describing the spider beings and the web that they set off across Earth. Of course, so much of that is embedded in this AI because it's the projection of the darkest of humanities. It's not the ultimate, they're not building the AI to be the ultimate ethical machine. They're building it for a totally different purpose. But the term ghastly, Gigi, how does that strike you?
It sounds like it's kind of like a disgusting sight to see. I mean, Dion Fortune describes something similar. I don't think it's exactly the same, but she talks about perceiving the death elementals. The elementals that are responsible for the decay process. Like
Yeah.
when they come in when someone dies and they carry out the decay process. There's all these kind of like elemental beings or these spiritual beings that carry out processes like a machine, right?
Interesting.
And they're very ugly. They're very ghastly. They're very scary looking. They represent death, so they look frightening to people. And I think the spiders are, you have Bowie's Spiders from Mars.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so you have I do think that they perform a function, but they are embodying that darkest form of technology sort of thing, something that we're confronting. And I think that it is very ghastly to see into that world. Right. It's very ghastly to see these sort of creatures, these sort of things.
There's no question about it. What's fascinating to me is it's funny you mentioned the Bowie thing there because I think Bowie returned to the spider theme later with the big glass spider. And he said that he did it because it kept coming up when he was sketching and things, this big overpowering spider. So it's definitely, a little alien part, a little demonic part in the background, and what the imagination he was getting on that. Really interesting. I do think when we're looking at this, we get little snapshots from people who are on this level, who are coming out of a mystery tradition. and they need to share things with humanity, but they also know I can share right up to that line, but if I share beyond it, this will be misused against humanity. So what I get, Steiner is giving us that little piece, just like when he gives us the piece about Ahriman and feeling like he's being, hauled into granite when he was tuning into Ahriman, how he feels like he's deep in cement.
Yeah.
That's like a snapshot, right? And that snapshot is giving us the environment. Because how do you communicate that when you've become a fantastic clairvoyant? You've been able to see these things. How do you bring it back and tell somebody, you know, this is what it seems like to me? So the term ghastly really stood out for me. The other thing I want to ask you about his reference on spiders and webs and things is how through that humanity losing the awareness of blocking this from coming in the first place, we eventually cohabitate with these things in our evolutionary line if we go down that track, which sounds very, very, difficult. And it sounds very, very tragic. Nobody wants these astral mechanical spiders in their regular everyday life. What is going on there? And is this the period that we're in? Is this why there's such a class, which is we need to awaken to such a point where we throw that off, because just going along in the day to day and being kind of half asleep to all this won't work for something like that, because it's such a change. Just like the scientists who were dealing with the atomic bomb and things of that realize, oh, here I am in my day to day consciousness. I've just developed something that can destroy the whole world.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I think with the spiders, they're when you see them, it's almost like you're going to have a very visceral example of when you're doing something wrong. Like if that thing shows up, it's like maybe you need to be more positive or something, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
because how I see it is they're performing a function. They're ghastly and horrific, and scary. They are scary. But they're performing a function. And so we have to learn, okay, well, what function are they? When do they appear? Why do they appear? And I think that's how we really learn to purify ourselves and develop, the purification of our astral body, the glorification of the etheric body, is we have to have some kind of image of what we don't want to be. We have to have some kind of image of what is going on when we are being animalistic, when we don't have control over our impulses, when we're acting in ways that are selfish. And we'll get that later in our future when we begin to see these things. And then you'll really because right now you can be a horrible person and you don't see what it's doing to your body, to your spiritual body. You don't see what it's
Yes.
calling into the world. You have no idea. You're just like, I feel great.
Yeah.
But later in the future, these things will appear and they're going to mirror to you the worst things about you and try to feed on you because you're producing a horrific stench yourself. And so it's like a way of confronting our shadow. That's how I see it.
Oh, interesting.
So
The
it's a way of
battle.
confronting something.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because if you awaken by the time that battle hits, it's almost too late. You need to be awake before
Yeah.
that clash comes into the material reality. That's the interesting setup here, because a lot of it exists on the imagination level until it's brought in. But once it's there, then it's too late.
Yeah, because you won't understand. You won't have the tools to understand why you're even seeing that thing or how to fix it or anything like that. It'll just, so.
Well, let's go way, way out for a moment, because you and I stick to the facts very often, but I also know about your incredibly powerful clairvoyant abilities, which you've demonstrated for years in your own work, but also, in our personal interactions. I'm very aware of this. This is what I want to ask you. Is it possible that these groups that are developing the technology are actually clairvoyantly, clairaudiently, Emma Britton style, in touch with these entities that are giving them directions of how to build these AI so that these entities can inhabit them and or control them.
Yeah, they're getting them to make them forms, you know. They're getting them to basically make them forms in AI and computers and then also destroy your form with transhumanism and genetic manipulation so that we can enter. Everything that they're doing is objectively demonic. Like when you move into transhumanism, you're introducing a synthetic process to your body that competes with your organic process. That's making it easier for demonic entities to enter because demonic entities require the organic and the natural to be demeaned. So when you start messing with your genetics, when you start taking anything from your natural form, transhumanism, this excessive genetic modification, you're playing God, you're a vessel. You're becoming more and more of an easy vessel for these entities. And that's what they
yes.
want. And then
Right.
everything we just talked about, they're getting them to create a world that is for demons to enter. That's what the goal is. And I'm glad you brought this up because one of the things that is incorrect on a lot of these different podcasts is that they'll always talk about, oh, I'm a remote viewer. Or I'm somebody who works for the government who is a power psychic. Or there is this psychic who is doing evil things.
Yes.
And they're like, they're a psychic, but they're apparently working through very unethical means. So that's not actually really possible. So when it comes to psychic ability, the first thing that we have to think about is this person an initiate? Does this person have the qualities of a spiritually advanced individual? Because you can have certain spiritual capacities if you are selfish, but they're not very deep. You can only get into the lowest level of spiritual perception. You can't, remote view everything in existence, every piece of information, every person.
Right.
That's the lowest level of remote viewing is the lowest level of psychic ability. It's the most materialistic. It's just basically going in your astral body and peering around.
Right.
A lot of psychics wouldn't even consider that to be a serious process.
Interesting.
So remote viewing is not some process where you're going to get all the mysteries of the world, right? Or, so you actually have to have certain qualities developed within you to have these exalted abilities to read the Akashic records, to go into certain places you cannot go into unless you're a moral person and you have your etheric body developed to a certain degree, which was the original degrees in mystery schools, was the level of development of the astral and etheric body. So you can't get into these different places unless you're of a certain level of initiation. What we're seeing is that, all of this almost like mechanized idea of intuition and psychic, like you can just take a military remote viewing course and now you're a power psychic. Absolutely not.
Right.
No, that is something else. You can do certain things that are incredible, but that's not actually getting into the real higher levels of information that they're not available to that process. So we have to be able to kind of understand that initiation is the key factor in psychic ability and spiritual capacity, and there are different degrees. And so yes, anyone can contact a demon though, but that's a different process. So when you're communicating with a demonic entity, that's a completely different process that's totally externalized than when you're communicating with your angel, or you're communicating through Christ, which is a completely internal process that's hermetically sealed and completely protected and goes through your own spiritual bodies based on your initiation. But you can make pacts with demonic entities and get information and all this kind of stuff, but it will degenerate your energy. It'll eventually drive you mad. You won't develop, you'll regress. And all sorts of, there'll be a cost. And so you can do certain things through, I would say, lower psychic processes. but there's a lot that you really can't do. And that's where we get into our conversation, people plagiarizing and stuff like that, is because you really do have to have a certain level and qualities to get into certain levels of information.
Oh, no question about it. Yeah.
And
I
then
mean,
the demons want you to build the machines too. So that's what they always want you to do. They always want you to, yeah, we're going to give you all this power, but you have to change the world into the eighth sphere through technology, genetic modification, and transhumanism so we can occupy it, because the human form is way too divine on its own for a demonic entity to enter at this point naturally, and the world is too full of Christ and too full of life for a demonic entity to fully take it over. It has to be degraded. So that's what the demonic entities get people to do, is invert everything, make it synthetic, and that's what they have to do to have power, and that's what we're looking at.
oh, it's a decadent,
Yeah.
a need for regression, and you have to lower it and lower it in order for something like that to be comfortable in that environment. That's fascinating. Just kind of for the picture of its sake, if somebody's getting information like that, you know, let's say we hear a lot of things, and we've talked so much about CERN, for example. How does the ritual itself shape up? Do you think that they put someone in there who is, like their version of an Emma Britton, and they try to have them be the vehicle for this thing to occupy to give them information? Do you think something like that is going on?
Yeah, I've seen things like that. And so everything, when you're working demonically, everything is externalized. Every process is externalized. So they have to generate an external field. And then they have to have the entity enter into it. The problem with it is that you really can't do it without a female. Females are the natural mediums. They bring life into the world through childbirth. But what a lot of people forget is that women make the best psychic mediums. Men are the best leaders out into the world, and they bring about, Christ in the world. And it's women that thin the veil. Their actual womb thins the veil into the spiritual world. It's an actual process and this is clear in any kind of ceremonial ritual of the pagan orientation. You get like the woman is the altar. And I talk about this in more detail in my occulted video, where I talk about, I think, Katy Perry and Sophia, and I get into it more there if people are interested. But
Yes.
yes, so in that position, women are not being used properly out of their own free will, co-creating something higher. They're being used just for their function.
Right.
The machines alone can't do it, because machines are just a technology. It's just a tool. There needs to be something there that's actually living, human, has life in it, soul in it, because every entity needs that soul essence to piggyback on. And so, yes, I do believe that technology would have to have some kind of female, almost like in Minority Report. You see Minority Report, you see these things, they've got these women in tanks, you see Stranger Things. Well, if you actually extrapolate how that technology would have to work, that's the stabilizer. That's the thing that thins the veil, and it's a very scary thought, but I can completely see that as being something that's going on.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned Stranger Things in there, because the fact that it was, set up in the 80s, the whole thing is set for the 80s. It was interesting to me because it's all pre-digital. So it's almost like, hey, we have the clearance to give you the pre-digital how we did things, but we're not going to tell you about how we did it digitally. And of course, so much of it is, let's say there's a huge caricature of commercialism on top of it. But I think it's interesting in that core story that all of this is taking place in an environment that is analog. It's, they're not in a digital space yet. So what I want to ask you, I guess there's a couple of things that occur to me about bringing this all around to the situation that we're in now. But before I do that, you mentioned to me you're doing a course coming up, and this course is for February, and it relates directly to consciousness. Can you tell me about the course, and then we'll go into the last section?
Yeah. I'm going to be doing a course in February, and it's going to be all about spirit guides and angels, and I'm really going to flesh all of that out and explain how exactly we work with our angel, the how messages come through, the exact esoteric anatomy of that. I'm going to get into the history of the spirit guide in the Victorian seance room and how that came about. And then we're going to track it back through
Oh, wow.
and actually
Yeah.
explain it from a spiritual scientific perspective, what's going on there, to empower and so that we can begin directly getting guidance from our angel and understand the different terminology around mysticism and start to bring it into a more structured, real understanding of spirit communication.
Well, that's fantastic. And so you're going to announce this course that people can sign up for. And when you take the time to actually do this, people have had amazing reactions to your courses in the past, by the way. I have a great list of testimonials of people who have had extraordinary experiences as a result of doing these things. But I think it's fascinating that you're doing this, and it's something that sets the tone for the year coming up, which I think is, that class that you're talking about doing is such a contrast versus what's coming in the sense, because you're really dealing with the hardcore, hey, here's the AI reality, and you need AI to exist, and all the rest of it. The complete opposite of the thing that you're talking about teaching there. People should really need to check that out, and it'll be available at ggyoung.com.
Yep, in the course section of ggyoung.com. I'll have a sign up sheet probably in the next few days if you want to pre-register. And it's going to go on for a month. So it's going to be very deep. So it's going to be really
Yeah,
fun.
you get into the deep stuff. We do the deep work on this show, and I always tell people if you want to go deep when you're getting into the psychic side, you have to go to Gigi Young and the
You
work that
have
she's
to.
doing. You just got to do it. I'll tell you also, it is interesting to me because it is the psychic impression, it is the clairvoyant vision ultimately that smashes the iron grid and the gridlock that the AI machine holds over humanity. That is why they pick their, in the mystery schools, the best psychics to come out, starting with Emma Britton. I mean, it's interesting to me when I read Emma Britton's story and the things that they did with her as a young person, 12 years old, 13 years old, using her as a channel for all these things. But Gigi, with your own abilities, that could have been a same type of lifetime for you. I mean, you could have, had something very similar in your life to Emma Britton.
Very similar. I had like the opposite of that in my current life, but there's no question that I've had lives as psychics, and I'm just carrying on the same old little mission.
You're like, I'm doing it again. Here I am.
Yep, we'll just doing it again.
It's very interesting because when we were doing some of our original shows, you and I, when we were first doing interviews like 6 or 7 years ago or something, we were talking and giving a snapshot of a world that was coming in. And I think that the conversation that we were having and what was happening in the public hadn't caught up yet. There were hints of it. And this is what I've always got from the work when I've studied things, like Steiner and C.G. Harrison, when they were talking about this period, about when the mystery schools were letting this information out and when the clairvoyant aspect was coming in. And you were talking about in your course, the whole seance aspect and how that arose and how the spirit guide leading that. It's very interesting to me because it was a key thing for them to let out. It was like that original workbook to say, you have all of it inside of you. You're actually the thing. The things that are happening in the world are all happening, inside of you. So you've got that world there, and the outside world responds to you. And this idea that everything that's happening in the outside world compels you to be a certain type of an individual is backward. And so here are the tools that address that. I think this conversation is so important for what's happening with the whole 21st century push to, digital ID and that whole social credit system and the AI robotics taking your job, and that you're supposed to lay back there and say like, oh, AI is here. There's nothing I can do about it.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the spiritual development, every single thing that AI and transhumanism promise is a capacity that you should develop within yourself. Right. And
Right.
that's the weird thing is it's like, you have these people that are coming forward and they're like, we're going to live forever. We're going to create eternal life. Well, that is your promise with God.
Hmm.
That is what happens when you heal yourself and you transform your astral body, your etheric body, and you live eternally. It's a spiritual process that the mystery schools have known about for thousands and thousands of years. The idea of clairvoyance and having some kind of chip in your brain that allows you to see a different spectrum of light. Like, who cares? Just
Hmm.
develop your clairvoyance. And so everything that technology promises, it's like you said, it's something that already exists within us. And so it's a test, it's a false mockery, it's a cheap knockoff of what we know we can already do. But it's
Right.
harder to
Yes.
develop. It's harder to take responsibility for your fear, for your trauma. It's hard to confront the parts of ourselves that are wounded and take responsibility for those. It takes incredible courage to own your light and your shadow. And that process is so intimidating that for a lot of people, they would rather just, take a pill, take a chip, whatever that is. Because they know on a deep level that eternal life is destiny, but they just don't know how to get there. But they can sense that it is, or that clairvoyance is where we should be. But they go with the false version rather than the real one because does take incredible courage to spiritually develop.
Well, it's interesting. Well, you're absolutely right on the right track with that because here's the thing. When they introduced Neuralink, which is a perfect example of what we've been talking about, Neuralink carried the promise that if somebody was disabled, you know, um, say a veteran who stepped on a landmine or something of this nature, and they'd have the ability to control their physical function again. That was the promise of it. Then Musk, finally came out this year and said, well, that was the original vision for it, but actually we're going to say that, people who want to volunteer, there's going to be this mind melding between the silicon in the chip and the computers. And if you have that right in your brain, you'll be right there with the computers and you'll be super augmented. Hey, happy days are here again. In fact, 10,000 people have signed up for the trial to have their skull capped open and have this thing inserted, the telepathy thing, which is not telepathy at all. It's just one computer communicating with another one. Gigi, what kind of madness is that?
Well,
It's a unique kind of madness, right?
well, you
I know
know,
we got you.
well, it's like I believe in free will, and I think that
Yeah.
people have the right to choose that
Hmm.
if they want that. I'm not going to lock you to the radiator and tell you that you can't get the neural link. You can do what you want.
No Neuralink for you.
Yeah, because I think that maybe it is a kind of it's almost like it's a kind of initiation. And I would just like to see there be a balanced conversation about it. We can't prevent these things from existing or people from engaging with them and but even in the Atlantean time there were certain things that happened exactly like this. People went into the same kind of degrading of the human form.
Oh, fascinating.
We talked
Yeah.
about that with Cayce, so we kind of went through this in Atlantis where certain people were being, mixed with animals, there was transhumanism stuff going on in the Atlantean period. So it does seem like this is sort of part of our human story. Do we become synthetic? Do we try to merge with, like, do we start to tamper with our holy form? Do we degrade it? This does seem to be like some kind of final boss moment that we're having, some kind of path that we have to cross. And we've crossed it many different times. And
Oh, yeah.
so there's something that we're learning from this, but I think in a practical sense, what I would like to see is just a balanced conversation around it. I think the discussion around things like Neuralink and transhumanism and even genetic manipulation, I think they're dishonest. I think as a collective, I don't think these are honest conversations. And when I see that, it seems like it's manipulative. That's how it comes across. This is not a balanced conversation about what happens when you put a chip in your brain at all.
Oh,
Do you want to
absolutely.
do you want to think your own thoughts still? Because that's the conversation that we need to have, and it's not being had. It's very manipulative how this is being done, and that's what raises the red flag and makes this very sinister. It's not that you can't invent these things again. We're going to cross all of these weird bridges. That's our destiny. People have free will. But the conversation needs to become much more sophisticated considering what we're dealing with. And right now it's just in echo chambers. Like there's a bunch of anti-transhumanist people and then pro ones, and no one talks to each other. And maybe it would be good to have an honest conversation about these things so the 10,000 people that get a brain chip realize that, hey, you may not be able to think your own thoughts anymore and dream your own dreams. Are you okay with that?
Oh, wow. Wow.
Do you understand that that's what you're doing? Because that's what will happen. So this is needs, and this is the kind of stuff that needs to be had. So
It feels like they're signing their souls away. It's
yes,
very
yeah,
interesting.
because when you get something like, were you going to take it out yourself?
Yeah.
It's game over, and
Oh, yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Unbelievable. Gigi, just amazing information. Now let's do another segment just for members, going even deeper on the spiritual challenge of advanced technology. Subscribers will get this in their inbox shortly. If you're not a member yet, go to darkjournalist.com now or follow the link in the description of this video. All of Gigi Young's courses are available at gigiyoung.com. Join us on Friday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for the Dark Journalist X series. See you soon.